They say the most dangerous man in the room is the one who says nothing. Not because he's shy, not because he's humble, but because he's calculating, watching, measuring your weakness by the way your lips move too fast. Most people can't stand silence. It exposes them. They start filling the air with justifications, nervous jokes, over-explaining, and in that noise, they reveal who they really are. But the one who holds his tongue, he's not playing your game. He's watching how you play yours, and that alone gives him control. Let's stop pretending the world runs on kindness. That's a bedtime story told to children by adults too scared to admit how power really works. Influence doesn't belong to the loudest. It belongs to the most composed. Caesar knew this. When he crossed the Rubicon, he didn't need a long speech. His silence said it all. A single act. Deliberate, silent, irreversible. The message was clear: I'm coming for everything they said I couldn't have. And Rome listened. See, most people talk too much because they want to be liked. They think the way to win hearts is by opening up, being relatable, being emotionally transparent. But transparency is a liability. When you show everything, you give people a roadmap to manipulate you. You hand over your psychological terrain on a silver platter, where your pride lives, where your guilt hides, where your insecurities curl up in the dark. And the moment you do that, you're done. Because someone, somewhere, will use that map against you. Silence, on the other hand, is opaque. It invites projection. People will imagine you're smarter, more confident, more dangerous than you really are, just because you're not trying to impress them. You create mystique. You generate respect not by pleading for it, but by withholding it. And that creates something modern people can't handle: tension. Real, uncomfortable tension. The kind of presence that doesn't beg for attention. It demands it by simply existing. You want to win a negotiation. Don't talk first. Let them sweat. Let them fill the silence with their own anxieties. You want to dominate a room. Don't rush to speak. Make them wonder what you're thinking. People fear what they don't understand. And nothing is harder to interpret than a man who controls his mouth. This is why Kissinger, love him or hate him, was one of the most formidable minds in 20th century geopolitics. He didn't win wars by raising his voice. He won them by playing long, quiet games of psychological chess. Diplomacy wasn't about who shouted loudest, but who blinked the least. He knew the weight of a pause. He understood that silence isn't the absence of strategy. It's the sharpest blade in the sheath. Because when you say nothing, you force the world to listen harder. And that's how power shifts. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you really listened in a conversation? I mean really listened. Without mentally preparing your next sentence. Most people don't listen to understand. They listen to respond, to win the social point, to prove their relevance. But those who stay quiet, they catch the details others miss, the hesitation, the cracks, the contradictions. And that's where leverage lives. You think Napoleon charged into battle screaming orders like a madman? No. He studied terrain. He observed psychology. He watched how people responded under stress, and he exploited those patterns. He understood that every man has a breaking point, and most of the time, they'll show it with their voice before they show it with their actions. The nervous cough, the need to dominate the conversation, the sarcastic jab that masks insecurity. These are tells, verbal fingerprints, but you only see them when you're silent. In corporate boardrooms, the same rules apply. The loudest guy pitching his idea, usually the weakest, he's overselling, overcompensating. The real player, the one who already has the funding, the influence, the backroom deals, he just listens. He watches the desperation unfold, and when he speaks, it's with precision. One line that ends the discussion, no debate, no fluff, just wait. That's the kind of power silence builds. Gravity. You become the black hole in the room. Everything orbits around you because no one knows where you stand. And in a world addicted to overcommunication, that mystery becomes magnetic. So, why don't more people do this? Because silence is uncomfortable. It requires inner strength. Insecurity needs noise to survive. Most people are terrified of their own thoughts, so they speak just to drown them out. But if you can sit with your discomfort, if you can wear silence like armor instead of shame, you become immune to most social manipulation. And here's the dirty secret, Og. The moment you stop needing to explain yourself, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. If people don't know how you'll react, they can't control you. That's why the greatest strategists don't reveal motives. They reveal results. Let people speculate. Let them wonder. Their guesses will always be louder than your truth. And that's exactly how you win. Some people say, but that's not authentic. That's manipulation. No, it's discipline. It's knowing that every word you say can and will be used against you. In business, in politics, even in love. Nietzsche didn't write aphorisms because he was lazy. He wrote them because the truth, when sharp and brief, cuts deeper. Why waste 1,000 words when 10 will do the job better? Let me leave you with this for now. If you want to win without saying a word, you must become comfortable being misunderstood. You must let people underestimate you, doubt you, talk over you. All while you gather intel, store leverage, and wait for the exact moment to act. Not when they expect it, not when it feels fair, but when it's strategic. This isn't about silence as weakness. It's silence as dominance. And once you master that, you'll realize most battles are won before a single word is spoken. There's a look some people give you when they realize they can't read you. It's not confusion, it's fear. Because the human mind is wired to detect patterns, to predict behavior, and when it can't, it panics. That's your advantage. Predictability makes you manageable. Silence makes you ungovernable. You've seen it in meetings. One guy talks too much, tries to own the room. He's loud, energetic, animated. But nobody remembers what he said. Then there's the quiet one in the corner, watching, saying nothing. And when he finally speaks, everyone listens. Why? Because he chose not to waste words. And in doing so, he made every syllable cost something. We live in a world flooded with empty noise, social media rants, corporate jargon, performative outrage. Everyone wants to be heard, but few have anything worth saying. And here's the paradox: the more you talk, the less your words mean. Volume kills value. That's why real power speaks in silence and moves in shadows. Julius Caesar knew this. Before he became dictator, he didn't shout his ambitions from the rooftops. He built alliances quietly, seduced power through charm, and played the role of the humble servant while the Senate played checkers. By the time they realized the game he was playing, it was already over. The republic fell not to a loudmouth, but to a man who knew exactly when to speak and when to let others hang themselves with their own egos. Do you want to see someone's true nature? Stay silent while they talk. Give them space. They'll fill it with boasts, lies, insecurities, confessions. Silence is like a mirror. It reflects people back to themselves. And most can't stand the sight. But here's the key. Silence isn't about passivity. It's about restraint. It's a deliberate act, a controlled burn. You don't go quiet because you're weak. You go quiet because you've learned the value of holding your fire. That's what makes a sniper lethal. Not the noise of the shot, but the hours of stillness before it. In relationships, it's the same. Most people try to fix conflict with words, apologies, arguments, pleas, but words often cheapen the tension. They try to control what cannot be controlled. If someone disrespects you, don't explain why it hurt. Don't beg them to see your side. Just withdraw. Let the silence do the talking. If they respect you, they'll feel the weight of your absence. If they don't, they were never worth the effort. Either way, you win. And in that space, that quiet gap, something strange happens. People start chasing what they can't hear. Your silence becomes valuable, desired, feared. That's the irony. The less available your words are, the more people want them. You ever notice how the most powerful people in any group don't speak much? Whether it's a CEO, a military commander, or the guy who just walks into a room and owns it without a word, their silence isn't void. It's presence. It says, I don't need to prove myself. And people respond to that energy because it taps into something primal. Evolutionarily, the alpha male doesn't talk to be accepted. He watches. He waits. He selects his moment. Think of it like poker. The best players aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who sit still, barely flinch, and let everyone else give themselves away. Their silence is a strategy. It invites mistakes, and when the time is right, when the cards are right, they act decisively, and the table shifts in an instant. Now imagine applying that in your life, at work, at home, in social circles. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining yourself to people who've already decided not to understand you. You stop reacting to every slight, every jab, every whisper. And you start doing something most people can't, watching without needing to respond. That's power, because the person who controls the reaction controls the outcome. Nietzsche wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." The same applies to how you carry yourself. When you stop engaging with nonsense, when you stop lowering yourself to meet the noise, people will accuse you of arrogance. Let them. They're not used to someone who isn't performing for their approval. But make no mistake, they're watching you. They're recalibrating their behavior around you. And that's the silent shift. You become the standard without ever demanding to be. But beware, silence isn't the same as weakness. It must be backed by force, the potential for action. You can't just be quiet and passive. That's not strategic. That's submission. Real silence comes from knowing that if you had to speak, if you had to act, you could shatter the room. But you choose not to. That's the difference between the monk and the warrior. One retreats from the world. The other moves through it, but speaks only when it's time to strike. That's what Machiavelli understood. He didn't care about virtue. He cared about effectiveness. And sometimes the most effective move is to do nothing outwardly. But behind the scenes, you're learning, you're building leverage. You're watching your enemies exhaust themselves. And when they're spent, you're fresh. Let them underestimate you. Let them misread your silence as absence. Let them think you've got nothing to say, because by the time they realize you were studying them, it'll be too late. You won't need to speak. You'll just act, and actions, especially silent ones, echo far louder than any speech ever could. So remember this: in a world drunk on noise, composure is a weapon, presence is pressure, and silence, when wielded with intent, can bend entire rooms to your will. You don't need to be louder. You need to be colder. You don't need to explain. You need to observe. Let them talk. Let them slip. Let them reveal. You say nothing. The truth is, simple words are cheap. That's why most people spend so many. Like counterfeit currency, they flood the conversation, hoping quantity will distract from lack of value. But silence is gold-backed. It's rare. It has weight. And in a world of inflationary noise, silence is the only real signal left. Watch how people react when you don't respond. Their assumptions spill out like confessionals. They'll fill in your silence with their own fears, their own guilt, their own story. It's a psychological vacuum, and human beings are desperate to plug it. That's where the leverage is, not in dominating them, but in letting them dominate themselves. When Caesar was kidnapped by pirates, he said almost nothing. He didn't grovel, didn't beg. He just studied them, joked with them, learned their habits. And when he was released, he returned with a fleet and crucified every last one of them. The lesson wasn't just vengeance, it was timing. He knew the real move wasn't loud revenge. It was measured response, strategic, delayed, surgical, a message sent not with shouting, but with certainty. You can learn a lot from that. Because in your world, whether it's business, dating, family, the people who wrong you aren't always worth confronting immediately. Let them get comfortable. Let them think you've moved on. Silence is patience in disguise, and patience, when combined with memory, becomes the most devastating weapon of all. Modern society teaches you to respond instantly, reply to the email, return the text, speak your truth. But why? Who benefits when you become predictable? Not you. You become a slave to the rhythm of others, always dancing to someone else's beat. But when you stop reacting, when you embrace the pause, you break that rhythm. You become the one who sets the tempo, and the person who sets the tempo sets the terms. In war, speed matters, but so does stillness. Napoleon understood this better than anyone. He could wait. His enemies would maneuver, panic, reposition, all while he remained silent, immovable. And then, a single move, fast and lethal. Not because he rushed, but because he waited for the moment. That's the difference between action and reaction. The fool reacts. The master waits, calculates, and then acts when the result is no longer in question. You ever notice how some people walk into a room and instantly pull the attention toward them without saying a word? That's not charisma. That's presence. And presence comes from inner stillness, from self-containment. When you don't need to express every thought, when you can contain your energy instead of leaking it, people feel it. They respect it. It unsettles them in the best way. You don't need to perform. You don't need to posture. You need to hold. Hold your power. Hold your composure. Hold your damn tongue. Because silence isn't passive. It's active. It's doing something most people can't. Resisting the urge to make yourself feel better in the moment, so you can win in the long term. People betray themselves with their words. They talk to relieve pressure. They confess out of nervousness. They lash out because they lack discipline. And every time they do, they give you something, an insight, a weakness, a crack in the armor. All you have to do is listen, not interrupt, not correct. Just observe. This is how intelligence agencies operate. They don't storm in shouting. They listen. They let targets talk. They record, they wait, they act when all the pieces are in place. That's not cowardice. That's control. The quiet man isn't avoiding confrontation. He's building a case. He's sharpening the blade. And in your life, that means learning to enjoy the discomfort of not speaking. In the argument, in the negotiation, in the moment you're being underestimated. Especially then, let them think they've won. Let them misjudge your silence as weakness, because the moment they do, they stop guarding themselves. And that's when you learn everything you need to destroy them. If and when the time comes, Nietzsche said that every deep thinker is more afraid of being understood than being misunderstood. Why? Because once people understand you, they can define you, predict you, box you in. But when you're silent, when you refuse to explain, you become ungraspable. You force people to deal with your mystery and not with your justification. And here's the part they never teach you in school. The people who get what they want aren't the most honest or the most likable. They're the ones who know how to create pressure without noise, power without performance. The quiet leader, the calm killer, the man who looks you dead in the eyes while you talk yourself into a corner. In the courtroom, in the boardroom, on the street. The man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't rush, who doesn't speak unless necessary. That man owns the frame. He dictates the meaning of the moment. He's not loud, because he doesn't need to be. And here's a truth most people can't stomach: morality doesn't win battles. Perception does. Strategy does. Discipline does. And silence is the ultimate form of all three. Because silence is what you use when you don't need to convince anyone of anything. You're not performing. You're not proving. You're just positioning. And that's far more dangerous. So next time you're tempted to jump in, to correct someone, to defend your name, to make your point, ask yourself, does this move me forward? Or does it just make me feel better for 10 seconds? Because the cost of a single unnecessary word is often far higher than the reward. The smartest men I've met in life had this strange quality. They could sit in a room full of liars, egos, and noise, and not say a single word, and still, they were the most powerful presence there. Why? Because they weren't trying to win the moment. They were playing for the long game, and the long game belongs to those who can listen longer than others can lie. That's how you win, quietly. Here's the final truth no one wants to admit. Most people lose, not because they're weak, but because they talk too much. They talk their way out of power, out of leverage, out of respect. They hand over their inner world on a silver platter, thinking honesty equals strength. But what they don't realize is that in any power game, exposure is death, and silence is survival and domination. Do you know what silence really is? It's insulation from their projections, from their manipulation, from their expectations. Because the moment you speak, you invite judgment, you invite framing. But when you stay silent, when you master the pause, you deny them access to your soul. You become untouchable, even in love, especially in love. Modern romance is full of desperation, endless texting, talking, explaining, performing. People confess too soon, reveal too much, chase too hard. They think communication is intimacy, but it's not always. Sometimes it's the enemy of desire. Mystery is power, and power, in any relationship, is what sets the terms. When you don't speak, you make others do the emotional labor. They analyze, they wonder, they worry. Your silence forces them into a state of uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds obsession. It's not manipulation, it's nature. Human beings crave what they can't control. Think of every dominant figure in history, not the tyrants who screamed, but the ones who moved in near silence, the ones whose presence haunted entire empires. Kissinger didn't need to bark orders. He would sit at the table, say nothing for 10 minutes, and entire governments shifted policy to fill the silence. That's not charisma. That's power seasoned with silence. The calm in his face told them, I know something you don't, and I don't need to say it. That's the posture you must learn. Not because you want to be feared, but because you want to be felt, truly felt. You want your presence to carry so much weight that when you enter a room, the atmosphere bends. And that only happens when you stop trying to be understood by everyone. Because not everyone deserves to understand you. In fact, the more people understand you, the more they can use you. That's why you must learn the discipline of being silent, even when it burns, especially when it burns. You must endure being misunderstood. You must endure being underestimated. You must endure the itch to explain, and let it pass. Silence is sacrifice. It's a slow burn, but it turns weak men into legends. You see it in strategy, in business, in war, in diplomacy. The one who breaks the silence first usually loses, because he exposes his needs. He shows his position. He reacts. But the one who waits, who holds, forces the others to act out of impatience. And that's the secret. Most people don't lose because of logic. They lose because of impulse. They couldn't wait. They couldn't hold the tension. They had to speak. They had to post. They had to respond. And in doing so, they threw away the advantage of mystery. When you're silent, you become a mirror. People project their own ideas, insecurities, and hopes onto you. They make assumptions, and if you're wise, you let them. Because those assumptions reveal more about them than anything they say aloud. And now you have the upper hand. Without lifting a finger, silence allows the world to show its hand. That's the difference between the strategist and the fool. The fool needs to express. The strategist needs only to read. Every room is a conversation. Not through words, but through posture, movement, eye contact, breath. If you're always talking, you miss the signals. But if you stay still, stay quiet, stay aware, you start to see the whole game unfold. This isn't about coldness. It's about clarity, about seeing reality as it is. The quiet man doesn't delude himself with words. He sees who people really are, what they really want, and most importantly, what they fear. And what do they fear? A man who doesn't need them. A man who doesn't flinch. A man who can sit in the fire of tension, say nothing, and still win. Because he knows something they never learned. Power is never loud. Power never begs. Power doesn't seek approval. It waits. And when the time is right, it moves once. Swift, clean, final. So the next time you're in a situation, an argument, a negotiation, a confrontation, ask yourself, is my silence building pressure? Or am I letting it go too soon? Because once you speak, you cannot take it back. But if you wait, if you listen, they'll tell you everything you need. The loudest man in the room is rarely the strongest. He's just the most insecure. The strongest man, he's the one who doesn't need to say anything, because he already knows who he is. He's already decided. And that's terrifying to those who haven't. Nietzsche once said, "Who has a why to live can bear almost any how." I'll take it one step further. He who knows how to be silent will never live at the mercy of those who don't.